So I'm finally all better from COVID, not sick anymore, able to use my shared office space again, so I'm able to make another video after what seems like forever, and everyone finally getting their hands on their pieces, hopefully. Hopefully nobody's stuff came in busted or too late. Thank you for everyone who's been watching the videos I put out and leaving comments and likes. That's been really encouraging, so I'm glad I started and can now continue. Very inopportune to get sick literally an hour after I uploaded those two videos, but happy to be back at it and responding to two comments that I got with two separate videos. One that's going to be Solar Auxilia coming up in a little bit, and this one, which is going to be focusing on Imperial Fists. Tenzler comments, I've been running the math on heavy support marines. They seem incredibly strong. The problem is getting them in numbers is tough. I reckon lists focused around Imperial Fists and missile launchers would just flatten things. That's an interesting point that yes, missile launchers and any sort of specialist marine unit that you want is relatively hard to get a hold of in numbers because with the standard infantry box, you're only getting 2 bases of everything that's not a tactical marine. Standard tactical marines, you're getting 8 bases, but for things like Terminators or the missile platforms, you're only ever getting 2. And as we covered in the Alpha Legions video, if you want a dedicated unit of just them, you need at least 4. Otherwise, you're mixing them in with your tactical legionnaires. So for both of my previous videos, they kind of had different ideas of how to approach the price of the game. The first video talked about swapping out pieces with someone else who had a starter kit and adding 2 units to it. The second one didn't really have any sort of limitation, I just ran with an idea. But for this one, and given this idea in the comment here, I wanted to see 2 things. One, how sort of viable are Imperial Fists right now, which I'll expand upon in a moment here. And what's the best way to sort of economically set yourself up for success with them? What is a decent, cheap way to get started with Imperial Fists as opposed to spending a ton of money on missile launchers if they're not necessarily necessary for the chapter. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. And I've actually got 2 lists today, but before we get to them, I'm going to start by talking about the Imperial Fists ability because it seems very strong at first. Once you read into it though, it's a little disappointing. Imperial Fists seem like a faction that is going to be good once more stuff releases. There's a few factions that are like that right now, which is a little bit frustrating, but allow me to explain what I mean by that, because at first glance, it may seem wildly wrong. The Imperial Fist Legion special rule is that if an infantry detachment is given the first fire order, it gains accurate trait on the following weapons: autocannons, las cannons, plasma cannons, missile launchers, bolt pistols, combi bolters, and bolters. 7 weapons in total, so that seems pretty good, right? Then you start looking at what these weapons actually are and what all has it. So let's start from the bottom there, the autocannon. Okay, there's not an infantry unit in the game that currently has an autocannon for you to make use of. Las cannons. There is one infantry unit in the game, the Tarantula Sentry Battery, but it's an automated sentry and can't be granted first fire. It can't be granted any orders, in fact, so that also doesn't benefit. Then we have plasma cannons, not plasma guns. Plasma cannons specifically, which nothing has, and in fact, if you go to the weapon profiles in the main book, it isn't in that index because nothing currently has it that has been released, or is even in the unreleased sort of bastion garrison units, right? Then we go to missile launchers, and it's like, okay, we know we have missile launchers. Cool, there's one that we can use. Bolt pistols. A 6-inch gun that is on an assault marine with jump packs that should be moving every turn, really not first firing, so pretty useless there unless they just happen to be mixed in with the Legionnaire squad that is first firing. Combi bolters already have the accurate trait. They're on your Legion command squad as well as your Terminators, and they're all accurate, so they're all re-rolling regardless of first fire, so not really sure what the point is there. And then your bolters, which is the other thing you're going to be using this on mostly, but at a high risk. So when you look at it, the weapons we're building around for this ability isn't 7, it's 2, which is very strange and really takes a lot of the punch out of the setup for Imperial Fists, which is why I think there's something that's going to be good in the future. Las cannons are going to come out. Something with plasma cannons is going to come out. More long-range firepower that is able to sort of lock down areas at range once you get set up and allow you to be accurate doing so with your infantry. That being said, if you're playing Imperial Fists, you don't want to just hear, oh, we'll wait to buy stuff. So what is a good way to set yourself up for success with Imperial Fists and take advantage of them with the parts we have right now, and sort of build in such a way that you're prepared when more stuff comes out to just kind of tack them on and strengthen your force, as opposed to having sort of a disparate force you're spending a lot of money on and kind of you're gonna have to rejigger completely whenever you get the new stuff. So let's take a look at the first list I went ahead and created. Now, I actually took a lot of time making this first list. It was really difficult kind of trying to identify what I wanted the list to be. At first I tried multiple small formations because I didn't want the formations breaking very easily, because if they break, suddenly I can't first fire. I thought, why not separate the battlefield into two flanks, and that way if any one flank falls, the other flank doesn't break and loses its ability. But that idea is not great for this kind of faction, and the playstyle Imperial Fists, both in the lore as well as in their abilities, want to be pursuing. What they want to be doing is this, and it's a little bit of a risky strat depending on how your opponent sets up their army. They want to be identifying a central point, maybe the middle objective, maybe a side objective, maybe the space between them. No more than two though. Getting there as fast as they can, turn one if possible, and setting up a defensive position in no man's land. Once they sort of impose that position, then you're free to first fire, and if your opponent wants to be contending for those middle objectives or that second objective that you've stretched to, they have to come into your first fire range. There is significant risk with this, especially when it comes to charges and the fact that you only have 8-inch guns for the most part on bolters, and you're going to be limited in your mobility. But that's all stuff we're going to address and lean into, as opposed to sort of trying to ignore and tool around. A lot of times people see the limitation in an ability such as this, and they try to sort of spend way too many points mitigating that ability, rather than leaning into the strength of the list and having just small auxiliaries kind of poking and plugging up the holes you need in a more flexible sense. As we go through this list, you'll see what I mean by more auxiliary ways to plug up our faults while still leaning it very strongly into what Imperial Fists are meant to be. So we start with a Demi Company, and again, we start with our Legion Command Squad as normal, and then we move on to a 12 base size core tactical detachment made of purely tactical legionnaires. This will take 6 rhinos to transport. Then we have another 12 base with 4 tactical legionnaires and all of our plasma gunner support. The reason I say all is I've made this list with the assumption that you've bought 4 infantry boxes. That's about $200. What that's going to give you is 8 of every specialist. So we have 8 plasma gunners, we have 8 missile launchers, jump pack marines, 8 terminators. It also gives us about 32 tactical legionnaires we're ready to use, and way more command squads than we ever need. The idea here is that the command squad will tack onto the plasma support sort of core detachment and use 7 rhinos to move up into a favorable position, as well as give ourselves and these extra 6 tactical bases a bubble of feel no pain against light fire, solidifying any core position that we really decide to put a stranglehold on. We're better in numbers here, and the more resilient we can make ourselves by garrisoning nearby buildings or clogging up streets, making the opponent move into our range if they want to contest objectives, but also putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be murdered by rending charges, because for some reason Auxilia infantry are really good at that, the better off we're going to be. Then we max out a 8-man squad of missile launcher support. The reason I've gone with 8 here is kind of flexible. You can split it up into 2 units of 4 if you want, that's fine. Experiment. The general idea here was it allows me to focus on garrisoning just one building as opposed to having to worry about spreading out and finding 2, really locking down one lane of fire, and it's harder for me to lose half at any given point in time, meaning I don't have to take as many morale checks with this unit and fear running away. But again, if you want to split it up, use multiple small units, that's up to you. However, for this next one, I do recommend running the full contingent of 8 as I have. That is 8 jump pack marines in a single detachment. The reason for this is the weakness of anything like an Imperial Fist army that is meant to stay in place is its ability to 1, exploit empty areas of the map, and 2, respond to external threats in a quick manner without compromising your main position. This detachment, as well as some other stuffs we'll be adding, really helps with that. You're able to jump around very quickly to any objective that isn't contested and take it. You're able to flush units out of garrison position overwatching your central bastion. You also get a bonus on that because you're a jump pack marine, so they're better at that. The fact that you're running them as 8 means if at any point in time your opponent decides to swing some spare infantry out towards any direction, you're better prepared for a melee with them as opposed to just 4. 4 normal marines won't do terribly much in combat, particularly if they run up against a much larger squad. 8 of them though, with jump packs, if they're going against a squad that's been softened up or it's only 6 people, you have enough mobility to where you can wrap and really take advantage of your numbers as opposed to theirs. So that's all to say, I recommend running these as a single squad of 8. Then we have our plethora of rhinos. We are running several. We're running 17 in total, so that's 2 boxes. And they get separated like this. You have 2 that are non-dedicated transports and 1 that is going to be a dedicated transport. The 6-man with 5 multi-meltas is going to go with the normal tactical legionnaires. The 7 is going to be for the command squad and the plasma legionnaires, and then the 4 going for a dedicated transport with the missile launchers, meaning they can get to whatever garrison building they need to get to in the first turn very easily. All in all, this ensures that in that first turn, you're taking the right steps to get to your position, your favored spots, and set up appropriately. You have rhinos clogging up the alleyways, you have infantry swarming the position, you have plenty of tactical strength, you are getting to any garrison buildings within the first or second turn, and just locking down the position so you can constantly first fire and be ready for your opponent to try to force his way in, and you're waiting there with a first fire unit ready to blow away whatever tactical strength they even try to put on your point. Again though, I've talked about how we need to be able to quickly respond to external threats, and an assault marine company can only do so much of that, and it really can't do much against armor. This is where I found something fun and economical that I thought would be a very interesting addition to this list that I don't think a lot of people are running, and that is Xiphon interceptors. You can buy a single box of 6 of these for 50 bucks if you can find them. They're a little bit hard and eBay's the main way right now. And while they're expensive in points, they are no slouches. A single squad of 3 is going to run you 255 points, but for that point cost, you get double the firepower of a Predator, one that is able to take air battles very well, and one that is harder to shoot than a Predator, and is quicker. So if your enemy's moving out of line of sight of your missile launchers on any flank, the Xiphon interceptors swoop in. Single squad's gonna have 12 shots that are more than capable of doing anti-tank and more than capable of hitting, and are even capable in some cases of taking out infantry bases if you need them to. And then at the end of the turn, they fly back off and they come back on another side if they're needed. It's a very interesting sort of addition. Aircraft is always fun to just include in a list, it seems. It's a bit of unique flavor that also just tactically makes sense. You know, you're holding your position, you call an aerial support, and bam, the Xiphons strafe in, take out whatever you need. Then for some dedicated heavy armor, we are including 4 Kratos tanks. They're very good and they're going to distract your opponent so your infantry doesn't get shot up too much. You do need to roll them up with your infantry so that they're in range to sort of harass and make sure they're a target. You don't want them dying, obviously, but you do need to distract the firepower from your main infantry line so they don't get chewed apart before the opponent actually gets them, they get a chance to fire. We then round out the army with a second Demi Company that is a little bit less offensively important, but is a little bit more flexible in certain cases. So we have our command squad and we have 2 units of Legionnaires, one of which is an 8 base unit, one of which is 6. Idea here is one of them is going to be sort of the custodian of your back line or your back objective. The other one can float around and kind of go where it needs to go since it's moving whenever you know where it needs to go. So if it needs to reinforce the middle, you send it there. If you're able to float them off and sort of threaten a weak side of your opponent that they've dedicated maybe 1 or 2 squads of infantry to, you can do that and kind of tie that area up and maybe even win if you support with the assault marines. That's fine. But then you have 2 different units of Terminators deep striking in, able to put pressure on where you need them, and you can combine these. The ability to deep strike with those individual units and sort of spread out, popping on objectives that perhaps your opponent has moved away from or is too far away, maybe with some vehicles that aren't going to be able to hold as well, is very good. And while you do have accurate firepower, again, it's not really the main thing these units are doing. So spreading them out and dropping them like this is great. However, if you think they're going to be getting into a lot of melee and that's what you want to use them as, by all means, take a full squad of 8. Then we get to round out this formation by having another unit of 3 Xiphons, the 3 that we didn't use from the box earlier, and having them be a separate squad that's able to come on another flank very quickly and make sure that if our flyers do get shot, they're not all getting shot at the same time. Now the second list is very simple. Essentially what you do instead is this. You go ahead and make about 1,000 points, very similar to what I've done with this first Legion Demi Company. You can take out the Xiphon interceptors if you want, giving you effectively 250 points to play around with. Then instead of the Demi Company, you take a Solar Auxilia sub-cohort as your allies, making it as cheap as possible with one exception. So what you do is you take a Tactical Command, a Storm Section, 2 Tercio Squads, all at the smallest level you can, and then you take 8 Leman Russes. 2+ armor save, decent range, decent movement is going to be a massive threat that is going to sort of soak up firepower, again distracting from your main line, as well as allow you to put sort of an armored presence on a off flank or a middle flank to respond or really shut down, depending on the needs of how your opponent is deployed and moved, very easily with a lot of durability. This is what this list could look like. The downfall of it is it doesn't have as much flexibility as the previous one I showed you with the Xiphons. It is way better at just taking that one bastion and reinforcing it to the max, and once you get an advantage, pushing that advantage out. But it's not as good as responding if you have a very mobile opponent or one who has significant amount of anti-tank. If you roll poor and you lose 4 of these Leman Russes early on, half of your Kratoses, it's gonna hurt quite a bit. But if you roll decently and you're keeping range, which the Leman Russes can do, again, you're gonna have things on lockdown. Overall, these lists are fairly affordable too. Again, we talked about having the 4 infantry units, which is about $200, and then you're gonna need 2 boxes of rhinos for another 100. Then you have the Kratos tanks for 50, and then you basically choose, do you want the Xiphons for 50, or do you want Leman Russes and some Solar Auxilia? If you want the Xiphons are another 50, meaning that you're gonna be spending about, on that first list, about $400, but setting yourself up for success in the future. And there's plenty of Tactical Legionnaires we didn't end up using, as well as a couple command bases. For this second one, you'll have to do some eBay shopping for the Leman Russes at the moment, but it's going to run you about $400 to $500. Is that expensive? Yes, but again, we're talking about something that you can build on, not something where you have to continuously buy just to sort of reap the benefits of a few small units, like buying 16 boxes of infantry just to get a bunch of missile launchers, right? That would suck. Ultimately, let me know what you think of these. Let me know what you think of the Imperial Fists ability, especially the way I've outlined it here. And let me know if there's anything you would sort of change and switch up. And then tune in for the Solar Auxilia video that's coming out soon. See y'all.